Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and today I'm taking on a very sensitive topic. It's an issue that people have asked over and over again when I interact with my YouTube audience or otherwise, whether or not there is a real concern about vaccine blood contamination. It's an inconvenient question because there are no easy answers. And science is going to have to play catch up on this. But I don't believe that we benefit by not trying to answer difficult questions. And I think this is the lesson we have learned from the COVID pandemic. So, what I'll be doing today is that I'll be going through this recent BBC story talking about the infected blood scandal in the UK, and I'll be taking through some of the science that is in existence. And I've found a paper, as usual, looking at blood transfusion and the presence of biological structures in the circulation. And that's relevant to the question. And we shouldn't ignore the public's concern, some of the public's concern on this, and we should try and find answers that are reasonable and critically honest. As usual, before I start, I'd like to encourage you to support our work by one, joining us on our Vision Med chatbot, the beta version. When you come to the page, it'll ask for your email address. And that's because we're going to plug you into our newsletter. If you don't want it in the future, you can always cancel the subscription. Critically, the site, when you get into it here, it will then allow you to search various things. And for those people who have an interest in particular people, so say for instance, someone was to type in GERT, straight away, you see all the videos come up and you can identify all the videos where GERT was being discussed. We're working on the health database. That's not quite finished as yet, but certainly most of the videos that we've done over the past few years are now there for in a searchable way, because for some reason it seems that a lot of my content is hidden on many platforms. I cannot understand why. This is important information. Additionally, coming up in just a few days' time, depending on when you've watched this, is the final part of Advanced COVID 360. And this time I'm looking at organ damage from a virus and vaccine spike protein. And this is part of this course that I've put together. This has been a labor of love looking at this 360 course. I'd planned to do it for years, but it was too overwhelming. But we are now down to module number 38. We're going to probably have about 45 modules in all, covering almost all aspects of COVID 19 with autoimmunity at the center of it. So, yes, if you want to join in that process, please look in the description below. And remember, there is going to be a bell on your screen just about here. If you click on it, you can subscribe because, again, surprisingly, my subscribe button is oftentimes hidden. I wonder why. Anyway, let's get back to the point at hand. This case is a big issue. So, within the last day and a half, there was a big investigation that had gone on for a number of years. And finally, the government stepped forward. This is Rishi Sunak. And he apologized after the infected blood scandal cover up. And you can see down here, he's truly sorry for the failures over the infected blood scandal. It was a decades long moral failure. And over 30,000 people over the 50 years were infected from contaminated blood treatments. About 3,000 have died. And it goes on to highlight that this was going on all the way from the 1970s. And they were importing blood products from abroad. They didn't have enough screening of this blood. When HIV came along, they didn't necessarily screen it as effectively. All kinds of issues like that were happening. And it raised some very important questions about how this occurred for so long. One of the problems was that the inquiry found that there was an issue of cover up, hiding the truth. There was a lack of openness, inquiry, and accountability, and downright deception at that time. This is a hard statement. This disaster was not an accident. That's Sir Brian, who had been coordinating this inquiry. So, very, very strong words were said. And it raises questions as to where we are today. They did end up saying that institutional defensiveness made the scandal worse. So Sir Brian criticized the delays for calling a public inquiry, which only occurred in 2017 under political pressure. And it had taken so long that some people, key people, had died or become too frail to give evidence. These are some big statements, and it's good that they have acknowledged it, but it raises the question as to whether or not lessons have been learned effectively that need to be considered. I'm going to play with for you a clip now from Andrew Bridgen, who was in the Member of Parliament, who is one of the few who is standing up globally to ask and advocate on behalf of his constituents and patients by asking difficult questions. Now, some people may not like the questions, but it's good that somebody is asking them. So, listen to what he has to say. This is just about a minute long, and I'll come back and share some more information.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to pay tribute to my constituent, Robert Angwin, who's campaigned for justice for himself and all others affected by this scandal for decades. Yesterday and today, from both sides of the House, we've heard the line, lessons have been learned, action will be taken. Madam Deputy Speaker, I imagine that's exactly what we would have heard in 1972 if we're here when the thalidomide scandal broke 11 years later. Since then, we've had OxyContin, we've had Vioxx, we've had Primados. The list goes on and on, Madam Deputy Speaker, all the way to the experimental COVID-19 vaccines today. Does the Minister agree that the only real lesson that's been learned has been learned by the public, that they can't trust government, any government, to protect them from unsafe medicines and treatments, and crimes have been committed, and it's a crime to cover up a crime? When are the arrests going to start? And if that has to include current and former members of this House, then so be it.
That's some big statements, and he did call it as it was. He didn't mince his words there. Because people, not just the people who are involved in terms of the science, but politicians did delay the investigations. They were involved in that cover up. Are they responsible? And these are the questions that we have to ask today. If there are problems in the future with regards to the vaccine rollout, will we see a similar approach to the way how it was handled? And this is technically what he was asking. I don't genuinely know what the answer is, but I will highlight to you what the science is probably saying. So let's look at the science. And this was a question that was therefore asked quite recently, well, in 2022 in France. So this is the paper here, Blood Transfusion and the Presence of Biological Structures in the Circulation. This is by Rita Tanos and Elaine Theory, and this was in April or September, published in September 2022. And what they were essentially saying is that we're continuing to understand about regarding biological structures which may be present in blood circulation, such as circulating free DNA, extracellular vesicles, neutrophil extracellular traps. And there are a number of things that can have immunomodulation and cell-to-cell communication. And if it's in the blood, in theory, it can have an impact. And the fact that you don't fully understand the mechanism is necessarily not really the reason why it shouldn't be properly investigated now. So I'm going to show you an image here, again from the paper, and it shows you that there is a lot of safety that goes into blood products. And mainly the one I want to focus on here is this on the right. They get blood from a donor. They then do leukoreduction. That's where they take out the white cells. They centrifuge it, And then they'll get from it red blood cells, they'll get plasma, they'll get platelets. And all of these are extremely valuable in the context of trying to help patients. You know, the the reality is that when somebody needs blood, very often it's not at a time where you have a lot of choices. If somebody's bleeding, if they're hemorrhaging either from their gut, or if they've been injured and they're bleeding, you just need to use blood that is available. The least concern is whether or not it could have something in it that could cause longer term injury. But it doesn't mean that this shouldn't be addressed. And that's the point, is that at the moment, I think what's happening is that the blood transfusion system is not accommodating any of the requests. And primarily, this request comes from the unvaccinated cohort because they are afraid of having harm done to them, because in their mind, they find that the thought that people could have circulating spike protein or RNA could be an issue for their health. And that's not an unreasonable position. So let's look carefully at what that paper showed us. Here is an image from the paper, and they were looking at the different blood constituents, the red blood cells, the platelets, the white blood cells, and so on. Um, this is the biggie in there, the exosomes or microvesicles. And neutrophil extracellular traps are one side, and circulating free mitochondria. But these here are really the big question because of how the body works. Now, we know that there is evidence that some people can have circulating spike protein for very long periods of time. I think more than 280 days, I think, was the longest that we have seen. And so the question is, how is that even possible? So when you look at the paper again, and it's showing you a number of structures here, you can see these here are mononucleosomes. They can potentially activate the immune system. They potentially do horizontal gene transfer. You have here mitochondria that can potentially have some issues in the blood. Again, neutrophil extracellular traps again can trigger immune-mediated problems. But as I said, the real big question here is these exosomes. What happens is that these exosomes are intracellular communication techniques for cells. So all cells do this. Some cells do it more than others. And what they do is they package lots of stuff in the cell, sometimes waste products that they can't get rid of, and they put it in the bloodstream for it to be picked up by other cells and then managed and destroyed. So these exosomes are very small and they float around in the bloodstream. It's unclear whether or not our current strategy with regards to blood transfusion modalities actually get rid of these exosomes. And these exosomes are likely to be what's carrying spike protein or mRNA that could be accumulated. Now, some people will say the mRNA is all destroyed. I think the evidence is pointing to the fact that there are some cells that continue to have it, seem to be able to replicate it, and circulate it in exosomes. So there is a real possibility that this is actually happening. But as I said, if somebody needs blood, if you are bleeding and or you are very unwell and needing blood, whilst it is a possibility, I would never say to anybody that you shouldn't have blood because you are afraid of a potential risk. But it doesn't excuse the system for not investigating the potential risk. So when I think about these things, I think about where do we see this already? And I found a good example here from Annals of Blood, when blood transfusion is not an option owing to religious beliefs. And what they're talking about here is specifically about the Jehovah's Witnesses who don't or decline blood transfusion all the time. And they do this. There are about 1.2 million active members in the USA, 8.7 million worldwide. The basis they don't believe in blood transfusion is centered upon the interpretation of several biblical passages that prohibit eating blood. And a member of the Jehovah's Witness faith who accepts blood transfusion faces severe consequences from the fellowship. So it is a real issue, and the health service has acknowledged it and accommodated it. So that's the template where you have people with religious beliefs who don't want blood transfusions, and the system finds ways to protect them in whatever way they can. They make sure they understand the risk benefits. They try their best to use different strategies to manage that risk if they need to have transfusions or if they can't have transfusions. I think that this is what the unvaccinated are asking for, is that if you can do that, if you can respect the beliefs of the Jehovah's Witnesses, you should be able to respect those views and concerns of the unvaccinated cohort. That means that there are many people who are unvaccinated who are happy to donate blood, but they want it to be labeled as unvaccinated blood and to be protected and used primarily in the unvaccinated cohort. Whilst it takes more work, and whilst it is a challenge on the system, I think it's incumbent on those people who are in positions where they can influence this to take it into consideration. Because if it is found down the line that exosomal transfer does cause harm in the context of an unvaccinated person receiving vaccinated blood that has exosomes in it, that has mRNA and causes symptoms, I am not sure if there is enough of an excuse based on the fact that we can do this or we have attempted to do it for religious beliefs. And that's just my thought. I think that whilst it is challenging, I think it shouldn't be discounted. And that is the issue. However, I will end by saying, in the context of an individual, and somebody did ask me this once, is should they get the blood transfusion? My question is, if this is not a religious belief, you have to look at the risk benefit. If the blood is directly relevant to saving life, or if you have to have it, then being concerned about a longer term risk down the line is probably not the priority. And that's how people have to approach it. However, there is still a reasonable perspective for individuals who are unvaccinated to advocate that blood banks across the world seek to find unvaccinated blood and reserve them for people who are unvaccinated. How you will prove that, how it will be demonstrated, how it will be carried out, will certainly need a lot of thought and research. But it is a real question that shouldn't be ignored and must be something that is addressed on behalf of all patients. So, again, as we end, remember, if you're interested in testing out our chatbot, please look in the description below. Remember, there's the Advanced 360 coming up. The description is below. And if you want to join the course itself, please remember we are over 38 modules. We'll have over 45 in total. Join us on this journey of science and exploration. Have a great evening.